That's one of the things that I really noticed when I started looking at older versions of the guide is there was this assumption that people using the guide had grown up as gardeners, that they'd grown up on a farm where they grew a lot of their own vegetables as just one of the things that the farm family did, that they were talking to people who had just grown up around growing fruits and vegetables and had been doing it their whole lives. And what we see anymore is that many of our gardeners are not coming to it with that experience.
The Kansas Garden Guide, one of the most popular guides to gardening in Kansas, has undergone a major makeover to better reflect the needs and experiences of a wide range of Kansas gardeners, especially new gardeners. The updated version of the Kansas Garden Guide, which was downloaded nearly 100 times a day in 2022, is now available to order from the K-State Research and Extension Bookstore. On today's Sound Living, a peek inside the cover of the new Kansas Garden Guide. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Rebecca McMahon, administrator of Kansas State University's Local Food Systems program, says the guide needed to be updated to reflect changes in practices as well as the way that people think about and approach gardening. Rebecca, first off, maybe just some background on how this updated version came about.
Well, the Kansas Garden Guide has been around for a long, long time. In fact, I have a 1983 copy that's only about 22 pages and line drawings and, I'm sure a very modern for the time full color cover. So the guide itself has been around for quite a long time. I've even had folks tell me they've got versions from the 70s and earlier. And so, as with many things, every so often they need a little bit of a refresher and an update and some changes to better reflect the needs of the gardeners that are using the guide. And so it had been a little bit over 10 years since the garden guide had been edited and updated. And so that is what we were hoping to do, is go back in and give the whole thing a refresh and an update from the previous version.
And from that earliest 20-page book, we're now up into the hundreds.
Yes. We're now just sitting at a hair over 200 pages. Depends how you count, if you count the cover and stuff like that. But yeah, we're sitting at about 200 pages.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are included in this edition. Maybe first off, some things that might be new that weren't included in some of the previous editions.
There's several new things, and of course, some of it's just update of the style and the content. Overall, theme-wise, I think one of the big changes is there's a lot more emphasis in this guide overall on options for folks with smaller gardens, like we often see in our more urban settings, or container or accessible gardens for folks that either don't have space or the physical ability to have a large traditional type of garden. So we have a lot just more information for those different types of gardening situations that folks may find themselves in. And we've added a lot of content with new gardeners in mind. That's one of the things that I really noticed when I started looking at older versions of the guide is there was this assumption that people using the guide had grown up as gardeners, that they'd grown up on a farm where they grew a lot of their own vegetables as just one of the things that the farm family did, and that they were talking to people who had just grown up around growing fruits and vegetables and had been doing it their whole lives. And what we see anymore is that many of our gardeners are not coming to it with that experience. Whether it was their parents that didn't grow up around a garden, or their grandparents or their great-grandparents, somewhere along the line, a generation or two generations didn't have that gardening experience. So we added quite a bit of content that helps folks that have maybe never had a garden or didn't have that experience of having a garden at another stage of their life, because it's just a different knowledge base. And so we needed to have information for those types of gardeners.
That's really kind of a reflection of society, too. We were seeing an increase in kind of home gardening before COVID hit, and then a real explosion once it hit.
Yeah, we saw a lot of interest in gardening during COVID, and I think folks also realized as part of that experience that gardening in Kansas is not quite as easy as it looks like on Instagram.
So true. And really, I want to talk about the layout of this. Was there kind of some planning that went into just exactly how we kind of start with the book and how we advance all the way from the beginning to the end?
You know, a lot of the structure and organization, we built on what had already existed and then just added some things and rearranged a little bit here and there. But yes, you know, when you start at the beginning of the book at the first chapter and you're going to talk about starting and planting a garden, and we talk about the soil and composting, different types of gardening methods. And then as we get, you know, kind of follow the season along, we're going to get to our pest management challenges, insects and diseases and beneficial insects. And then we get to the harvesting and storage and food safety topics towards the end. So overall, it does kind of follow you through the whole season. And then kind of the second half of the book is more what I would consider a reference section where you can go more in depth on specific vegetables or look for different sorts of information.
That was one of the things that really caught my attention was the fact that I even wrote down that it goes from asparagus to watermelon and everything in between.
Yes. The vegetable crops chapter, which is chapter 15, is really about half of the book, and it does, like you said, literally go from asparagus all the way to watermelon. If you're wondering why not zucchini, it's because zucchini is lumped in with summer squashes and pumpkins and stuff like that. But yes, hopefully almost anything you want to grow you can find in there, or at least enough information to get you started. Yeah, we tried to include vegetables and information that can help you figure out what direction you want to go. You know, whether you're wanting to grow a very traditional American orange flesh cantaloupe, or if you're wanting to grow, you know, a much less common Korean white fleshed melon. Hopefully you'll be able to find what you need to get yourself started.
Well, and the fact that you have so much information on when to start planting, when to do the harvesting, or at least, I guess, approximations of when that might be occurring.
Yes. You know, one of the things that I have learned with over the last 15 years of gardening in Kansas, so I grew up in northern Wisconsin, and the weather is very different, and the gardening season is very different. And then I've lived in other places and gardened in other places, and then moving to Kansas and being here for 15 years, I've really had to learn and appreciate that with the Kansas climate, we have to be on point about when to plant and when to harvest and everything in between, because if we're not on top of our schedule and our planting plan and knowing the right time to plant things and when not to plant certain things, we're not going to have near the success. I mentioned the Instagram gardeners, and the things folks see on social media. So many of those resources that you run across are from the Pacific Northwest or the Northeast or even the Great Lakes region. And all of those places have much milder climates, much cooler summers than we have. And it's so critical to know what to plant and when to plant it here in Kansas, because the weather is going to fight back.
This really is a way to not only get started with gardening, but if you're even a more advanced gardener, this is not only informational, but it's really educational as well.
I hope that even an experienced gardener can take this guide and find something new or inspirational in it. One of the things that I've learned is that we're always learning more. We're always learning new things about how plants grow and how to accommodate the challenges of our Kansas climate. And so we're always learning new things. One of the things that I think agriculture has learned a lot over the last 10 to 20 years is the importance of organic matter and soil biology. We had a good understanding of soil chemistry and fertility, and I think there's increasingly that understanding of the importance of the soil biology, of having live plants, of having cover crops, of keeping the soil covered to, prevent erosion and maintain nutrient levels and maintain soil biology. So we're always learning something new. And sometimes we think we understand something and then we learn something new and then we learn something new again. So I hope that even an experienced gardener can take the guide and find some new ideas or new ways of thinking about gardening, or maybe some new vegetables or herbs that they might like to try.
Well, along the same lines, I was also thinking that when it comes to the pollinators and beneficial insects, because typically we think of any type of insect as being bad.
That is very true, especially for our newer gardeners, but even more experienced gardeners. The immediate instinct when you see any sort of bug or insect or creature even in your garden area on your plant is to assume that it's causing a problem, or that if it's not causing a problem yet, it's going to be causing a problem shortly. And so it's, I think, again, one of those examples of learning and changing our perspectives a little bit to realize that not all insects are actually bad, and many of them are beneficial and may even help control some of our harmful insects as well.
Also want to touch on the fact that not only is there great information in the book, but there are a ton of photos, charts, diagrams, everything you need to have a successful garden.
Absolutely. We're so visual anymore. We all need pictures and different ways to absorb that information. So we really tried to include great pictures, but also, like you said, diagrams and charts that can help folks figure out what it might mean to implement a technique in their garden, or to figure out what's a good option. You can only learn so much from a book, and of course we're talking about a particular book, and, I highly recommend it. I put a lot of time into it, but there's only so much that you can learn from a book. You have to get your hands dirty. I always like to encourage folks to find a mentor, a gardener who's been gardening for a long time, that can give them some of those insights of what it's actually like to garden in your very specific location. And so I think those charts and pictures and diagrams are an attempt to provide a little bit of mentoring to a new gardener or a learning gardener, but it's still only on paper.
But a great way to, as you mentioned, really connect with one another. And if you're someone who is maybe a more experienced gardener, you can probably use a lot of those photos and just kind of tell the story to maybe a child or someone who's just starting out in the garden.
Exactly. If you are a more experienced gardener, hopefully the garden guide is going to give you some tools to help serve as that mentor. You can't always be there telling every piece of information, but here's a resource you can direct folks to help them start being more independent.
And let's also add that this is a great coffee table book as well, because once you see it and you pick it up, you're going to want to thumb through it.
It is a beautiful book. Our graphic design folks did an amazing job. Our communications folks did an amazing job with the layout and the artwork. I think it's beautiful.
That's Rebecca McMahon, administrator of Kansas State University's Local Food Systems Program, with a sneak peek at the new Kansas Garden Guide. To order the guide, visit bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu or contact your local county or district extension office. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.